And so for today's Tales from the Deep program, we are featuring Brittany Visona, one of OceanWise's marine biologists, and she's going to be sharing with us the not so glamorous life of a marine biologist. 10 reasons why saving whales is tough work. And so we're really excited to be diving into the great work that Brittany does with OceanWise and really kind of taking lots of your questions and comments all throughout the program. We want to learn from you what you're interested in knowing about the work that Brittany does with OceanWise. And so to start off today's program, I'd like to thank all of you for being able to join us today, as well as to say how grateful I am for the opportunity to teach, live, and learn on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And by focusing on making sure that we're giving back to the land and taking care of the land so that the land can look after us, and that reciprocal relationship is so important for developing the program content for online programs like today's Tales from the Deep, as well as all of the work in education, research, and conservation that OceanWise is able to do. Well, we have a very eager audience that I know they're so excited to connect with you. And so actually, without further ado, we can turn it over to you. I'll make sure that you are the presenter here so that you can share all your great images with us. And we'll make sure that you're all set.
Okay, great. All right. All right, guys, sorry for the delay. I'm Brittany Visona. I'm a research biologist studying killer whales with the Marine Mammal Conservation Research Team at OceanWise. And today I'm going to talk to you about the not so glamorous side of being a marine biologist and 10 of the reasons why saving whales is actually quite tough work. So if many of you are like myself, you wanted to be a marine biologist or have mentioned it at one point in time, but did you really know what it means to be a marine biologist? If you ask different groups, you're going to get different answers. So I'm going to tell you what it's really like being a marine biologist from the point of a marine biologist who studies whales. So although it may seem like a quite glamorous job and that we're out there all the time just watching whales, that isn't always the case. There are some not so glamorous sides to it as well, such as spending days on the water in search for whales and not finding any, or spending hours in front of a computer where we have to eat chocolate just to stay sane. So I'm going to tell you about the 10 reasons why saving whales is tough work and some of the day-to-day tasks of being a marine biologist. So reason number one why it's hard is that you have to find funding, something that you just don't think about, but you have to fund your research study, whether you are part of a non-government organization, a university, or with the government, you do have to find funds to fund your research project, as well as staff and even your salary. So this means that you spend a fair amount of time writing grants and writing proposals to individual organizations or to the government and trying to find funds for your research project. And once in a while, you also have to get creative in trying to find these funds. So you develop things like adoption programs to help cover the costs. Reason number two, budgets and budgeting. Nobody tells you that this is a very large aspect of being a marine biologist. You have to do budgets from the start of your project to the end, from the proposal and grant writing stage through tracking expenses and monitoring that you have enough funds to finish your project. And if you don't, then you go back to step one, and that's writing more proposals. So you end up having a love-hate relationship with Excel. So it's something to be aware of. And you also end up being quite an accountant, which I never expected to be as a marine biologist. Reason number 3, field preparation. There is a lot of work that you have to do before actually getting out to the field if you're lucky to do so. And the first one is a lot of paperwork. You have to obtain a lot of permits and licenses to study whales and to study animals out in the wild. So that's a lot of animal care permits, species at risk permits. If you are operating a vessel, you'll need all the appropriate certifications to run the vessel and the radios. And if you are flying drones, you need a drone certificate. So it involves a lot of paperwork to obtain all of these approvals. You also require a lot of equipment. So luckily you've done your budgeting, and then you have to go and purchase all your equipment. That's anything from drones to cameras, binoculars, GPS units, hydrophones. There is a lot of heavy equipment that you need to be able to go out into the field. And what no one tells you is that if you are doing research on a boat and your organization owns a boat, that you also have to do all the maintenance on it. So a lot of the times you end up covered in oil or bottom biofouling paint or boat wax, and you do so several times throughout the year, getting the vessel all ready to go out in the field. And once you've done all of those other steps, then you have to pack all of that heavy equipment onto the boat, which is usually miles away from where your car is. So it means you obtain a lot of wheelbarrow skills over the years of lugging all of your equipment out to the boat. Reason number 4, long days and long field seasons. So a typical day in the field is anywhere between about 8 to 12 hours. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It's all depending on if you have good weather and if you've found whales. If it's a great weather day and you have whales, then you can be out there for 14 plus hours trying to collect as much data as you can, because it's only sometimes a couple of those great field days that you end up with most of the data for your field season. And you can be on, if you're on a boat, it can be a very luxurious boat with a kitchen and head, so your bathroom, and other ones are more open to the environment. You can also be out on land, or you can be on a research tower in the middle of an estuary with nothing else around you but tourists. So very long days out in the wilderness. And field seasons last anywhere from 10 days to 5 weeks. So it's pretty exhausting by the time that you're done. And if you're like me, if you're like me, then you end up actually seeing whales most of the time just through the screen. So you don't actually get to really witness the whales that are right beside you. Reason number 5 is you have to brave the elements. So it is very cold in some of the places that we're out there searching for whales, which means you end up wearing multiple layers and you can barely move. Other times you are out in the beating hot sun, dying from sunburns, which is almost always the case. You always come home darker after a field season than you went into it. In some places, you have to deal with the insects. So that's something that is you have to deal with in field season. And same with seasickness. And the thing about being seasick is you usually don't know if you do get seasick until it happens. It can depend on the water conditions or just how much the boat rolls. And usually every marine biologist at one point in their career does get seasick. So it's never fun. And also, which doesn't help with seasickness, is bad smells. If you've ever been around a whale, you'll know they are not very good smelling animals. If you're downwind from a blow, they're very, very stinky. Same with sea lion haulouts. So a lot of bad smells may also not help with seasickness. And these are all things you have to deal with when you're out in the field. And you have to deal with all of this while you're carrying 4 to 6 pound cameras or binoculars, or carrying 13-pound drones. And you do so all while out in the middle of nowhere. And you also have to try to figure out how to relieve yourself on some of these unforgiving research platforms that don't have washrooms available. Reason 6, collecting disgusting samples. So sometimes for your own research, you are collecting samples like these. Sometimes it might not even be for your research, it's for our colleagues, and you still collect disgusting samples. So it can be anything from prey samples to assess diet. You can look at poop samples to also assess diet, as well as genetics and hormones. You can look at stress and pregnancy in animals. These are all photos of killer whale poop. Yes, it's disgusting. Yes, it smells as bad as it looks. It ranges in consistencies as well as colorations. It's just lovely. Snot samples are something else that you may end up collecting to look at bacteria and microbiomes. And if you end up in a situation where there's a stranding and there's a dead whale, then you might get called in to help perform a necropsy. And so you're collecting samples all over the whale to determine cause of death, identify the individual, sex or population, look at contaminants, diet, hormones as well. And the funniest thing is that most biologists, when they do end up getting to help perform a necropsy, always have a smile on their face because we're secretly very weird. Reason 7, unpredictable field seasons. Whales are very mobile, so they're never in the same place day after day. So you are always out there in search for whales with your binoculars. You can stare for days to weeks trying to spot a whale. We usually go several miles and drop the hydrophone down and listen if we can hear any whales that are around that we might not be able to see. When it's even really, really flat, sometimes you still don't see whales because they're just not where you are. So that makes things very frustrating, especially when you're only out in the field for so long and you need to collect your data. And then when you do find whales and you're ready to collect your data, sometimes the weather is bad and it stops you from performing any drone flights. If it's too windy or if it's too choppy, you might not be able to collect your samples. So that gets very frustrating if you've been especially days without whales. Also in the field, you always have to troubleshoot equipment. It just always happens at the most inconvenient times. And it's especially frustrating when you've had days without whales, you finally have whales, it's good weather, you're all ready to go and collect your data, and then your equipment doesn't work. So it makes for very stressful situations. Also very stressful is losing samples or losing equipment. So if you have acoustic recorders that you keep on the bottom of the ocean for long periods of time, you then have to go and retrieve them, but they can move around with the currents. So now you're grappling down there for days to try to find the acoustic recorders and get your data back. If you are dealing with drones are so unpredictable. They sometimes just fly away or fall out of the sky, which is not good for anyone. And if you're trying to collect samples, sometimes you lose them. If we are collecting biopsy darts, It's only about like the size of a pen. That's sometimes hard to find in the water. If you're collecting things like poop samples, that's only floating on the surface maybe for a couple of minutes or so, and then it sinks, or it's already has sunk a bit by the time you got there. So that's very frustrating because you can't retrieve your samples. So lots of things to deal with when you're actually out in the field. Reason 8, months of data analysis. No one tells you that the field portion is only a very, very small portion of the job if you're lucky enough to go out in the field. Most of your job is behind a computer in an office, mainly conducting data analysis. So some of the data analysis does happen out in the field, but a lot of it is done when you get back and you spend months upon months staring at screens, sometimes just black and white screens. If you're looking at acoustics, you can be sorting and IDing thousands of images you took during the field season, or you could be entering pages on pages of data into a database. So you spend a lot of time in front of a computer, and if you ended up using samples and that's what you were out in the field doing, then you spend months in the lab analyzing those samples before you can actually get your data to then go on to finding your results. So if you're doing any genetic, hormone, contaminant, or prey projects, you're in the laboratory doing that analysis. And then when you finally get your data, then you spend tons of time in spreadsheets, and you do a lot of statistics. So in university, you usually learn a lot of different skills, and some of them you don't think you'll ever use. You will use statistics, so get used to them. Same with coding. You'll have a love-hate relationship with coding, as it's a steep learning curve, but it's your saving grace by the time you actually end up learning how to use it. And since it takes so long to end up getting your data, getting it to a point, then you analyze it and creating graphs or maps and that show your results, you utter the phrase, "Look at this graph," way more than you would hope to. And then this Nickelback meme comes up a fair few times. Reason 9, endless reports and papers. There's a lot of paperwork at the end of it, all throughout the year, actually, from permit reports to grant reports, budget reports. You end up doing all of these reports. And once you've kind of put those aside and you've gotten into your results and you've found findings and you're going to write your papers and you build a manuscript, that's a whole process and a half as well, that in either way ends up with drinking beers at the end of it. And finally, the last reason, reason 10, hours of public speaking. You'll have to get used to it, because once you're a biologist, you end up doing a lot of public speaking to convey your research and your findings out to the world. And you also want to highlight all the conservation issues around species and habitats and the things that you are doing your research on and wanting to conserve and protect. So you end up doing a lot of presentations, and a lot of them you have to do because they're written into your grants. And you want to because you want to showcase your work, because full circle, you want more grants. So you end up wanting to really showcase how great the work is that you're doing. But you definitely have to get used to speaking in public. So why become a marine biologist at all? Well, it's because of moments like these. You get to see some incredible things that no one else gets to. You get to work with these animals and learn about their day-to-day lives. And then you feel like the work you're doing is actually benefiting them, which is the main reason why I became a marine biologist. But if you didn't become a marine biologist, you can still help save marine life. And you can get involved in other ways. So if you're along the BC coast or off of northern Washington and you see a whale, dolphin, porpoise, or sea turtle, you can report your sightings in real time to the BC Cetacean Sightings Network through the Whale Report app. And these sightings go into a database that allows us to look at the distribution abundance and changes of these animals over time so we can better protect their habitats that they utilize. And if you report in real time, then those sightings are actually relayed to commercial vessels and through the whale report alert system, and it lets them know that there's whales around so that they can do their due diligence and avoid a ship strike or disturbance to these animals. And if you are out on the water, whether it's on a boat, a paddleboard, or a kayak, make sure to be whale wise. Give the animals the space that they need to do what they're out there to do. And that's finding food, or it could be when they're trying to mate. There's all these life processes that we don't want to affect. So make sure that you are being whale wise and giving them the space that they require. You can also get involved in other ways. You can choose OceanWise sustainable seafood. So if you see the OceanWise label on any seafood packages or in a restaurant, then that is a seafood from a sustainable source. So it's caught in a way that is least damaging to the environment. You can dispose of your waste responsibly so that there's less pollution in the oceans. You can reduce, reuse, and recycle, and you can pledge to be plastic wise. You can get involved in shoreline cleanups to help keep garbage out of the ocean. As I mentioned already, you can support research by adopting a wild killer whale, and you can always donate to conservation organizations to help support the work that they do. So that's kind of what it's like to be a marine biologist. I hope I didn't make it sound too terrible, but thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Brittany. That was fantastic. And I think that you have a great audience here because no one was thrown off by any of those examples that you gave. I had great comments from our audience today saying, that doesn't sound so bad. I can do that. Still sounds amazing.
Amazing.
So that's fantastic. And I really loved how you highlighted some of those things that we don't typically think of, maybe when we're dreaming of a career as a marine biologist. I know that I personally, before education swept me off my feet, really wanted to pursue a career in marine biology, and all of those tips and experiences that you shared are really helpful in kind of planning correctly for what that might look like.
I was just going to say, I'm happy to have shed some light on what it's really like. And yeah, it's so good that I haven't deterred too many people.
And I hope that today's, opportunity to speak, maybe does add to some of those commitments, but was a little bit fun. We always, of course, love learning about the research going on specifically, but having opportunities to share just a general advice on what the career looks like is really fun for us, and I hope it was fun for you as well.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Well, we have lots of questions coming in from the audience, and one of my favorite that came in straight away was, how do you actually collect killer whale poop?
That is a great question. One of my colleagues, Kate Yaley, she's a master's student, and that's her main project right now with OceanWise, UBC, and DFO. And so she's out there with us in the field, and they are on a little boat. Actually, the first boat that I showed, the little Zodiac, the orange one, that was actually her and her research assistant. So they go out there, they're several hundred meters, usually 200 meters plus behind the whales, and they're looking for feces, which is very difficult to find because it looks very similar to algae. So especially in her first year, she didn't know, is this whale poop or is it algae? I'll collect it anyways. And it ended up always being killer whale poop. So you basically get this kind of algae-like substance that can be near the surface, or it can be quite far into the water column, depending on whereabouts the whales have pooped within the water column. And basically, she's in the front of the boat looking for this, as well as smelling for it, because it does have a smell. It does smell a little fishy, or a little, as you would expect poop to smell like. And she's out there with her little cup on a stick, a little beaker, and she goes, and when she finds any, she'll just scoop it, so you get seawater as well as the fecal sample. And then she has a centrifuge on board, which she can then spin the samples to remove the seawater and just keep the poop sample. But it does take a lot of time on the water, and you don't always get samples every day.
Ah, yes, out there on a boat tracking poop. Definitely inspirational. But that's very good to know, because it's true, thinking about, it floating out there in the water. How do you get it? So thank you for that insight. I also love this question, kind of thinking about OceanWise overall and how we work together on different projects. The question was asked, do you use data from the BC Cetacean Sighting Network to plan your trips?
Yeah, we most of the time we contribute a lot to the sightings network. So every time we're out there conducting our research, we're always reporting every single sighting to the network itself. But you can see trends of where you end up seeing these animals along the coast, but also just from experience of being out there, you kind of have a sense of which habitats they utilize. A lot of these animals have critical habitats that they're typically in at certain times of the year, and we generally base our field seasons around that. So it's a lot of it's knowledge built over the years, but also just kind of knowing what these animals are out there doing. And so looking at prey in the areas, that's usually how you can kind of figure out whereabouts these animals are, where they could be, and we kind of put it all together to figure out where we should be going to go and find the whales.
Wonderful, yes. Lots to keep track of for sure. And I think you really inspired a lot of our audience, with some of the experiences that maybe you hinted at. And so one question is, what is the grossest thing that you've ever had to collect or that you discovered on some of your work?
That is a great question. I would say I'm pretty lucky because most of my work is kind of the cleaner work where I'm using drones to collect images for body condition assessment. But we do end up helping with the fecal sampling, and looking at some of those samples kind of gets to you a bit, especially when you get the whiff of smell off of it as well. I think that's probably the grossest.
Makes sense. Yeah, that those smells can be pretty overwhelming. I have to say, I've always kind of been at a distance, and they can be pretty strong. Another question about you and your career is, how many species of whales have you personally researched, and kind of how many species of whale are there on our coast? What are the possibilities?
That's also a great question. Yeah, we have many different species of cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises off of our coast. There's over 23 species, and I've seen a fair few of them. You do have to travel quite far to see some of the rare ones that are only quite far offshore or don't show up very often. My main work has been around killer whales, as well as humpback whales. So I've seen the different populations of killer whales off of our coast, as well as humpback whales. Dolphins and porpoises are usually around too. So you see Pacific white-sided dolphins, as well as harbor porpoises and Dall's porpoises. Sometimes they're interacting with the killer whales or in the same areas as the humpback whales are. Usually, as I've mentioned, all of these whales are focused around food. So if there's a lot of food, you usually end up getting a lot of species in the same areas. But most of my work has been mainly around killer whales, but I've also done some work with some whales off of the Scottish coast in the North Sea.
Lucky that the West Coast here has those killer whales for your research and to have you here with us. I love the range of students in our audience today. We have everyone from younger audiences to grade 11 biology students and recently graduated biology students from SFU, all asking kind of what is your advice on taking those next steps to pursue a career in marine biology, maybe even specifically working with killer whales?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start, since we have such a wide audience, I'll kind of start at like the high school level first and work my way up. So as I've kind of alluded to, there is a lot of math involved in being a marine biologist, and there's also obviously a lot of biology. So any sort of science courses you can take in high school, biology, chemistry, physics, those are all courses that you'll need to end up getting an undergraduate degree and then going into further higher degrees after that. So definitely taking as many science courses as you can, as well as math courses, because you will always be doing math throughout your career as a marine biologist. Once you get to the undergraduate level, you can kind of specialize in whatever you prefer. If you don't have a marine biology focused program at your school, it could be biology, zoology, geography, environmental science, fisheries, any of those aspects you can kind of tie into being a marine biologist. So you just want to kind of gain those skills when you're going throughout school. I highly recommend learning programs such as R, statistical software is a huge plus to learn. It might not be available in specifically biology courses, but your school will offer it. So look for that in the university level. Same with any GIS courses. That's a very important skill to have as a marine biologist. And when you're doing your undergraduate degree, as much experience as you can get is what I would suggest. So in your summer off seasons, try to find a job that you can get some experience, whether you're out on the water, it could just be operating boats. You're just gaining those boat skills that we look for. So it doesn't even have to be with marine life at all. It could just be you're doing a taxi service. That's still a skill set that is required of a marine biologist. Or if you can do anything with fisheries or any environmental science of sampling out in the field, those are all important skills that you want to start kind of gaining. So it doesn't have to be marine related, it doesn't have to be whale related, but you're just trying to get those skills to eventually work your way up into a job that is what you're gearing for. And look for professors that are studying marine life or certain aspects of marine life that you're interested in. It doesn't have to be killer whale related. You could be really into acoustics, but then somebody is focused on belugas instead, but you could still end up doing a killer whale project because it's acoustics and that professor studies acoustics. Same with looking at prey. You could be a fisheries major, but still get to work with killer whales because that is it goes hand in hand, essentially. So you don't have to go straight towards being in the whale world or working with killer whales. It's doing all the kind of the in between and figuring out what you really like and what you're good at is also a very important skill to have.
Wonderful. I loved that focus on kind of all those other skills. Definitely math. Don't run away from the math, I think is a great piece of advice. But yeah, thinking about, the boating skills is definitely something that you can do. Maybe that's a great new skill to work on during the pandemic if it fits. Get out there, get some boating hours in. So that's really wonderful to hear. There's lots of great questions about, both volunteer and work opportunities with OceanWise and OceanWise research. And of course, if that's something that you're interested in for our audience, please definitely follow OceanWise on LinkedIn. That's probably one of the best places to find all of our current and ongoing job postings that are going up there. But there's also some questions about just being involved in killer whale conservation kind of informally, not necessarily as a career option. So I know, Brittany, you posted some great links to some other programs through OceanWise, but what are some ways that people can maybe make some changes in their own life or volunteer to help protect these animals?
Yeah, so for killer whale conservation in general, the main threats to killer whales is prey availability. And so for a lot of our killer whales off of our coast, that relates to fish. So as I mentioned, making sure that when you are eating any seafood, that you are choosing the best kind, the least destructive, the ones that are coming from healthy stocks. That is very important. Also, just watching how much fish you are having as well has a big impact on the system. Other things, big threats to killer whales are pollution. So, as I mentioned, just making sure that you're disposing of things properly. Plastic is a huge, huge issue in all forms, from microplastics up to very large plastics that get into our oceans. So whatever we can do to reduce our plastic use, it means less plastics end up in landfills and then less end up into our oceans. So that's very important as well.
Wonderful. So there's lots of things that you can do right after today's program, after learning about all these great things and while you're feeling really inspired to make those changes. And I've put several of the links that Brittany had listed in her presentation in the chat. So you can always click on those, open some tabs to peruse later to learn a little bit more. I think it's great to see our audience also responding with kind of how much of a personal connection they feel to the killer whales on our coast. And so definitely that killerwhales.org, that right? I think link that I shared there is going to help you learn a little bit more about all those great families that we have off our coast too. So we are at 1:45. That time just flew by. So I really want to thank you, Brittany, for the great presentation and to share with everyone, if you were madly making a list of those 10 things to keep in mind, this recording will be posted on the OceanWise YouTube channel, usually up by tomorrow afternoon, just by the time everything gets processed. And so you can always go through and check out that great advice a second time or share it with any aspiring marine biologists that you know. And so we're so lucky to have the opportunity to connect with Brittany today. I do just want to share a couple ways that you can stay connected with us throughout the week and to find out what's coming up next for our next Tales from the Deep program. And so today we had Brittany join us, and next week, if you do follow our OceanWise Facebook page, you can always follow the Tales from the Deep events posted there. It's great. It gives you a reminder. It's easy to share with friends. And we're really excited to have Karina Draycott joining us next week, who is going to be talking all about life with porpoise. And she's going to be sharing insights into harbor porpoises in northern BC. And so we really hope to see you back here next week at 1 p.m. for that presentation. We're going to have a great cetacean focus for the next few programs. We, of course, want to stay connected with you in between programs as well. You can always find out what's happening with OceanWise Education by following us on Twitter at OceanWiseEDU or checking out our education.ocean.org page. For updates about our latest free live streams covering many different topics, You can also check us out on the live stream calendar at ocean.org/learn-online. And of course, you probably still have heard many different things going on in the media surrounding OceanWise and the Vancouver Aquarium. And as a nonprofit organization, we definitely need your help to continue doing all the great work that we're doing. As Brittany mentioned, our research team works so hard at applying for all of those grants to keep doing what they're doing. Education also has that opportunity to apply for different grants opportunities, but it's really the support of our community that keeps us going. And so you can always find out different ways to connect and support by going to vanaqua.org/support/community. And so we're really grateful for you taking the time to join us this afternoon. And I hope that you share with friends and family if you liked this program and you'd like more people to be able to join in. So thank you so much, Brittany, and thank you so much to our audience, and we hope to see you next week.